One of the things that Microsoft has gone to great lengths to improve is the support for mobile computing in Windows 7. You know, back when Windows 2000 was around, and even in the early days of Windows XP, people with notebook computers, they were greatly outnumbered by those using desktops, and there wasn't the huge demand of power-saving features and notebook-friendly tools that we see today. So in Windows 7, Microsoft, they've continued their commitment to notebooks that they started when they released Windows Vista. Now, one of the changes Microsoft have made in this area since they introduced Windows XP is the introduction of what they call power plans. These power plans quickly allow you to change the power mode of your notebook computer so you can adjust your settings on the fly, giving you the ability to either improve the performance of your notebook or maximize the battery life. We'll see that our power buttons on our notebook, they can also be assigned a behavior as well, ranging from turning off your notebook to sleeping it and to other choices. People who like to perform presentations, they're going to appreciate the way that Windows 7 handles connecting to a projector in order to display your PowerPoint presentation. And finally, we're going to take a look at how we can configure offline files so we can still access our network connected files even when the network's unavailable due to us either having network issues or simply just unplugging our notebooks from the network. Now, I'm currently connected to a notebook here, so we can take a look at the mobility options we have within Windows 7. You see, some of the options on Windows 7 aren't available when you're logged onto a regular desktop, which is logical. I mean, why would you have a meter telling you how much battery life you have when you don't have a battery? That wouldn't make sense. So for the purposes of being able to demonstrate all of the mobility options, we'll be using a notebook for this video, and that does make sense. So firstly, let's go and click on the Windows Start button, and we're going to go and open up the control panel. And here underneath the hardware and sound heading, we've got a link at the bottom here to adjust the commonly used mobility settings. Now we can either click this link here, which will, by the way, only appear on a mobile computer. So if you don't see it, chances are you're logged onto a desktop. Alternatively, we can click Hardware and Sound, this green link at the top here, and then right down the bottom underneath the Windows Mobility Center heading, we've got a couple of links. So let's click this Windows Mobility Center, and that'll pop up this window like you see here, but the options that you see will depend on the type of notebook that you're using and the software that your notebook manufacturer has provided. So for my machine here, what we're really seeing is basically an overall summary of the options that we usually see in this screen behind. So what can we see here? We can play around with the brightness of our display. We can see that the battery in this case is 47% charged, and it is charging. And our battery is using the balanced setting for its battery life, although it's not actually in effect because I do have it plugged into power at the moment. Now we'll be able to see the status of our wireless connection. In fact, this little icon here gives us a visual representation of our signal strength, and we can click that. And that's going to pop up this little window here showing us the status of any network connections we have. Now, from this window, of course, if you decide that you don't need wireless at the moment, we could turn that off as well just by clicking this button, which of course is not a bad idea. If you do happen to be traveling with your notebook and you don't want to connect to any networks, feel free to turn it off. That's of course going to save you some battery life. Now we can also connect our notebook to an external display. We can synchronize our notebook with another computer, such as our desktop or maybe a share on our corporate server. And we can also connect our notebook to a projector if we're planning on doing some presentations. Now if we close this window, on this page behind, you'll be able to see some of the options we just looked at. They're listed here. But there are some additional settings as well. For example, right down the bottom here in the bottom right, we've got an option here to adjust settings before we give a presentation. Now this is pretty cool because it allows you to put your notebook into presentation mode. So if you firstly check this box here at the top, it's going to force your notebook to do a couple of things. Firstly, your notebook will stay on, meaning it's not going to go into any hibernation mode, or it's not going to go to sleep, and it's not going to display any pop-up system notifications. Now that's good, since the last thing you want when you get up in front of hundreds of people when you're presenting is to have your notebook shut itself down to save battery life, or perhaps throw up messages telling you that you need to update it, and things like that. Any of those would be highly embarrassing. So it's going to hide all of those messages, so that way your computer's free to display your presentation without hindering you or embarrassing you with any of those sorts of things. Now you'll note here that the default is also to turn off the screensaver when you're presenting, which is also a good idea. Since you aren't always actively using your notebook during a presentation, you might be fielding questions from the audience, for example. And by disabling the screensaver, it can prevent yet another unprofessional moment of having your PC drop into screensaver mode and then forcing you to stop what you're doing to get your presentation back on track. Now we can also choose to show a different background when we're presenting, which is another nice feature since it allows you to keep your standard desktop wallpaper intact and then move to a more professional wallpaper such as your company logo when you're presenting. Now these touches are quite nice, and I'm sure that most people that give presentations on a regular basis is going to love them because it means that you don't have to sacrifice your normal look and feel of your notebook just because you occasionally present. So in a way, you've kind of got two sets of settings, your normal ones and those ones that are activated when you're giving a presentation. All right, well, the next option I want to take a look at here is our power options, which are always welcome on a notebook computer since maximizing the battery life is a thing that we always want to do. Now, by default, Windows 7 does come pre-configured with 3 power plans, and you can see these listed here. In fact, you can only see 2 listed, but if we click down here, Show Additional Plans, that's going to pop up a new one. So we do have 3 plans. We have a Balanced plan, which we're currently using, the Power Saver plan, and the High Performance one. This Balanced power plan, this is the default one that's going to kick in once we switch over to battery power. So with this plan, Windows 7 will try and balance the battery life with the performance of your system. So what Windows 7 will do is it'll lower the power consumption of your components, things like your CPU, for example, when the computer's relatively idle and it's not doing much. And that's going to save you battery life. And it will let the CPU run at full speed when it does need the extra power to run applications. So as the name suggests, it's a balanced approach. Now next we have the Power Saver plan, which slows down the notebook speed utilizing power saving modes in the CPU. Now obviously that makes it run slower, a lot slower in fact, but if you're on the road, you'll probably appreciate the fact that your battery will last a lot longer. So this power saving plan certainly isn't going to make your notebook a great gaming machine, but if you're using Word or some other application where you really don't need a high-powered machine anyway, then it will help squeeze the most life out of your battery. Finally, our High Performance plan does pretty much little to save your battery and places an emphasis on making sure that your notebook runs as fast as possible. So to change these plans to suit your own desires is as simple as clicking one of these radio buttons here, and that's it. Now if any of these plans don't quite do what you want them to do, over here on the right you can choose to change the plan settings. So let's set this back to balanced and we'll click Change Plan Settings. And we can further dive down into the individual settings that we want our computer to use. Now rather than changing these settings though, you might also like to create your own power plan. And you can do that. We'll click Cancel. We'll come over here to the left and we'll choose to create a power plan. So let's create a new one and we'll try and create one that maximizes our battery life. So first, we'll need to choose one of the initial 3 inbuilt plans to use as a baseline for our new plan. So we've got our Balanced, Power Saver and High Performance one. So since we'll most likely want to create a plan that maximizes our battery life, I'm going to choose the Power Saver as the template, if you like, for my new plan. We'll need to give it a name. I will call this one Long Battery Life, and we'll click Next. So now we can set the sleep and display options that we want this plan to put into effect. So firstly, we can choose to dim our display, turn off the display, put the computer to sleep, and we can adjust the brightness of our screen. Now you'll note we've got 2 columns here. We can do this for when our laptop is on battery life and of course when it's plugged in. So the default for this plan is to dim our display after 1 minute on battery life. After 2 minutes, once it's been plugged in, we'll actually turn off the display if our computer has been inactive for 2 minutes on battery and 5 minutes once it's plugged in. And do note that pretty much all of the options here in the right-hand column when it's plugged into the mains power are a little bit higher, because obviously if you're running on power, it's not going to affect your battery life, but we're all a little more power conscious than we were a few years ago, so keeping these values low is not only going to help save the environment, but it will save you a few dollars as well. So whilst after 5 minutes it's going to turn off the display, once we're plugged into the mains, you could set it a little lower if you like, or set it to never if you want it to stay on. Ultimately, that's up to you. All right, well, once we've set these, let's just set that back. I misclicked. We'll click Create. And there's our long battery life plan. The truth is, though, that so far we've done very little to differentiate this plan from the others. So over here on the right, we're going to go back and click Change Plan Settings. And we're back at the screen that we've just seen a moment ago with all of our options up the top here. But on this screen, though, we do have one more option, and that's to change our advanced power settings for our power plan. So let's click that. And it's from this window that we've got a lot of different configuration options for our power plan. And it's from here that you're going to be able to maximize your battery life. So up the top here from this drop-down list, we can select the power plan that we want to modify. And then in this bottom part of the window, we can choose the settings that we want. And there's quite a few of them, starting with asking if we want Windows 7 to ask us for our Windows password if it wakes the computer up from a sleep mode. Now this does default to yes, and that's fine, and certainly the best option for security purposes. Underneath hard disk, we've got options here to turn off our hard disk after a certain period of inactivity, saving battery life. And if you want to change any of these values, it's as easy as selecting the option and then just setting it to the value that you want. Now we can choose whether to use the desktop slideshow feature, both when it's on battery and when it's plugged into the mains power. And you can see that by default that feature is turned off when we are on battery, since it needs to spin up the hard drive to change the wallpaper, and obviously that's going to take power to do that. So this power plan is going to stop that feature while you're on battery, but resume it when you're plugged into power. Now scrolling down, we've got lots more options, allowing us to fine-tune Windows to turn off USB devices, PCI Express devices, even making the CPU work the way you want. For example, under our processor power management section, we can set a minimum and a maximum CPU level. So if you really want to conserve power, you might choose to set, say, the maximum processor on battery at, say, 50%. And that will mean that your CPU will only appear to be as half as powerful as it really is when you're running on battery. And that's certainly going to save you a lot of power. But is it going to be enough power to run your applications? Well, that's up to you. You can set this how you see fit. Okay, well, let's close this. And over here on the left-hand side of this window, we've got another couple of options we should quickly take a look at. First of all, we can choose whether Windows should require us to enter our password when the computer wakes up from sleeping. And we did just see that a moment ago in our advanced settings. We can also choose what action pressing the power button on our notebook will perform. So let's click that. And by the way, if I just click cancel, you'll also note that we've got a couple of options here, choosing what the power buttons does, choosing what closing the lid does. Either of these two things, when we click them, are going to take you to the same screen. So click whichever one you want. It doesn't matter which one you select. Okay, so what do you want your notebook to do when you press its power button? Now the default, as you can see, in fact, for all of these options, is to put your notebook to sleep, whether it's on battery or plugged into the mains power. But we could change that, of course, or we could set our notebook to do nothing. We could tell it to sleep, we could tell it to hibernate, or to shut down. Now, I used to have my desktop computer set to shut down, but my 2-year-old son just loves to walk over to my computer and press the power button. So now I like to set this to do nothing. That saves a lot of aggravation. But if I didn't have that special requirement, then I'd probably set it to simply shut down. Now, when we press the sleep button on our notebook, we can again choose to do nothing. We can choose to sleep or to hibernate our machine. And finally, if we just close the notebook screen or lid or whatever you want to call it, what do we want to do? Again, we can do nothing, sleep, hibernate, or shut the notebook down. Now, if you're not aware of what hibernation means, hibernation is when the notebook takes note of the state of your open applications and your documents, and information about those is then written to the hard disk. It doesn't use any power, since the computer simply shuts down after it's saved a snapshot of where your system was at that point in time. Now, the upside of performing a hibernation is that your machine will start up quicker than a completely shut down computer would, with your applications exactly where they were when you hibernated the machine. All right, now down the bottom of this window here, you can see that it's going to require us to enter in a password when our notebook does wake up from sleeping. And of course, you can change that if you'd rather not enter in a password at all. In fact, we've seen this a couple of times now. Let's click cancel. And we'll go back to our control panel. And over here on the right, I'm going to click this category link and change this to either large or small icons. It really doesn't matter for the purposes of what we're doing here. We're going to scroll down to the bottom, where we can see another option, which is the Synchronization Center or Sync Center. This Sync Center allows us to synchronize files from a remote resource such as a share on a file server, and it enables us to grab copies of files on our local computer, which we can then take with us when we disconnect our notebook from the network. And of course, it helps to have them locally available just in case the remote device happens to go down or there's a network problem and so forth. So let's click this and see what it can do for us. Now, in order for you to have the ability to work with these offline files, you must first have a network or remote resource that you want to synchronize with. And as you can see, by default, we don't have any sync partnerships set up on this computer. So what we're going to do now is we're going to quickly set up a network share so that we can see this in action. So I'm going to click Start, and I'm going to right click on Computer, and I'll choose Map Network Drive. Now I'll map to my Z drive. It doesn't really matter for the purposes of this video. I'm going to map to a share that I have on my domain controller, which I've simply called Share, and that should be a blank share. There's nothing in it right now. So we're going to create something in here. Let's right click. We'll create a new, let's go with a new text document. And let's just open it up and enter in some text. This is some text. No, it's not. It will be if I could spell. There it is. It's some text now. Let's close that and we'll save it. Okay, so now we've got a remote share. Let's go back to our computer here. There's our share, so we're going to right click on that, and we're going to choose to make it always available offline. Now, by the way, if you don't see this option here, and although you should see this option because this feature is enabled by default in Windows 7, say perhaps you've turned it off and you need to turn it on again. So what we'll do, I'm just going to click always available offline for now, and I am going to go to our control panel and back to our Sync Center. On the left here, if we click Manage Offline Files, from here you'll be able to disable the offline files because we currently have it enabled, or this will change to Enable Offline Files if you've turned it off. So if it doesn't appear, you're going to need to come in here and click this button. Okay, well, so now that our share here has been made available offline, this share is now a sync partner with our computer. And in fact, you can see here this little green icon here over our network share icon, which indicates to us that it is, in fact, a sync partner with our computer. So if we go back to our Sync Center, you can see here that we now have a sync partner that's been set up. So if we double click this, inside here, we're going to be able to see all of the shares that we currently have synchronized with our computer. And over here on the right, we can see the last time that this folder was synced with our computer. Now, there's a couple of ways that we can synchronize this network share with our local computer. If we first of all simply select our share and we'll right click there. We can choose to synchronize this network share with our local computer. Alternatively, if we come back here and select our share, we can click the sync button. And if we don't have any particular share selected, let's say we've got a list of a whole bunch of them here, we've got none selected, we can choose to sync all of them. And whichever one of those you use is going to update that selected offline folder or all of these offline folders so that any differences between our local offline folder that's stored on this Windows 7 machine and what's available on the network share is going to be copied over to our computer. So that way we're then able to unplug from the network and we'll still have that folder available to us. So we can do it manually like you've just seen, or we can synchronize on a schedule or a specific event. So when we click schedule, we can choose which items we wish to schedule, and by default all of our partnerships will be selected here. So we can just select the ones we want, we'll click next, and then we're able to choose to schedule our sync to occur by a specific time or whenever a specific event or action occurs. Now the time-based schedule is pretty obvious. You only need to select a time or a date and start synchronizing. So let's choose the second option to take a look at. Okay, so here we can choose to have our offline folder synchronized when we first log on to our computer, if it's idle for more than a certain specific amount of time, or if we lock or unlock Windows. Now if we click this More Options button, we could also choose from any of these further options as well, including only starting a synchronization if our computer is running on mains power, for example. Now down the bottom here, we can also choose to stop our synchronization if our computer wakes up from being idle or it's no longer running on external power. So if I was to pull the plug on my notebook and it starts running on battery, it can stop that synchronization. Now actually we do have more options than what you see here in group policy, but I'll get to that later on in this video. Alright, so let's choose one of these. Let's just say if I lock Windows for argument's sake, we'll start our synchronization then. So let's click next. Now we only need to give our sync schedule a name and click Save Schedule, and we're ready to go. Now, I'm just going to cancel this. Once you see that these files are synchronized, we can work with these remote network file shares normally. So we can forget that we've even synchronized anything. Just work with it as you normally would. But if they happen to go offline for any reason, and that could be just because of a network problem, or maybe we've unplugged our notebook from the network so we can go home, we want to do some work out of the office, whatever the reason, we'll now have this folder available locally to work with and would simply access it from the same way we would our normal share, just by going into our share here. Except this time, it would actually be coming from our local machine and not the share. Now, when normal network connectivity is back and running, and we can access the original shared location again, our local offline folders is going to be synchronized back with the ones on the server, and that's going to happen automatically. So back to our sync center. Over here on the left, we can also view any sync conflicts that we might be having. We can view the results of any previous synchronization efforts, and hopefully you're going to see a bunch of ticks here indicating that everything's been okay. And of course we can set up new sync partnerships if we like. Alright, now let's choose the bottom option here to manage our offline files. And from here, of course, we're able to enable or disable offline files. We saw that a moment ago. We can open the sync center from here, and we can view our offline files that we've got currently stored locally. So if we click this button, then expand mapped network drives, there's our share, and inside it is our documents that we can work with offline. So in here, you're going to find the contents of your offline files. Now, another thing that you'll probably want to be conscious of is the amount of disk space that you'll allow your offline files to use, since depending on the folders you're synchronizing with, that could obviously get rather large. So up here we have this disk usage tab, and here we can see what our current limits are. And if you want to change any of these, simply click the Change Limits button, and then you can set, using these slider bars here, how much space you'll allow the offline files to use and how much space you'll allow temporary files to use as well. Now, if you want to clean up some things straight away, you can also delete any temporary files immediately if you like. Now, next tab, the encryption tab, is where we can configure our offline files to be encrypted. Funnily enough, that's a good idea if you're using offline files on a notebook for security. And don't forget, even though this feature is really most thought of for notebook computers, desktops, they can also use offline files, and it's a good idea to use them when you have slow, unreliable links. But generally speaking, it's more likely that a notebook is going to be stolen before a desktop, and for that reason, Microsoft recommend that you do encrypt your offline files, since it's highly probable that the files from your network drives are going to be more likely to be confidential company files rather than the non-critical operating system files or program installation files on your regular notebook drive. So to encrypt your files, simply click the Encrypt button. And be aware that this can take a bit of time if you're planning on encrypting a lot of files. And obviously, now that we've encrypted our files, if you want to unencrypt the offline files, you've got the option to do that here as well. Right, our final tab here, the Network tab. That's been grayed out for me because this feature needs to be first enabled in Group Policy. But what this tab does is it allows you to configure this to automatically work offline when Windows detects a slow network connection, and by default it's going to check for a slow network connection every 5 minutes. So let's take a look at how we can change these group policy settings, although I must admit up front that it's unlikely in a workgroup scenario you're going to be editing your Windows 7 policy. This is more likely to occur in a domain environment. But the process of editing these policies is the same. So we're going to click Start, and we'll type in gpedit.msc. Okay, and that fires up our local group policy editor. Now underneath our computer configuration heading, we're going to expand administrative templates. We'll then expand network. And down here, we'll choose offline files. Now on the right hand side, you can see we've got quite a lot of policies here, all relating to offline files, and we're not going to go through all of these, but there are a couple that I do want to highlight for you. Firstly, let's just switch to our standard tab to make it a little bit easier to see in this small resolution. And down the bottom of the list here, we've got this Configure Slow Link Mode policy. Now this is the policy that, if enabled, is going to ungray out that last window we just looked at. So let's right click on here and choose Edit. We can now set this policy to be enabled. And now we're going to scroll down here, and we've got this button here. This button says Show. In fact, if we set it's not configured, you'll see that grays out that box. So let's enable it. We'll click Show. Now here we can set, or either set a UNC path and define that as a slow link, or we could define everything as a slow link by simply entering in an asterisk. So in this value field, we'll need to set what we consider to be a slow link by defining the throughput or the latency of the connection in question. So if I just move this over here so we can see the screen over here on the left hand side, you can see that these fields are asking you for, first of all, a server name or the path to a share. That'll be our value name field, and in the value column it's asking you to enter in the word throughput and a value, or latency and a specific value. So for our share here, we could enter in the share, which is 10.32.0.2, and an asterisk. So in effect, we're saying anything that's coming from this share is going to have a latency of, say, 50. Now, another popular policy that we have here is to also force our users to encrypt the offline folder's cache. Now, we did look at how to do that manually a moment ago, but you can also set it here using this policy. So let's right click and choose Edit. And all we've got here is a simple enabled or disabled option. There's really nothing else we need to do. So we just set that to enabled and click OK. All right, well, there are quite a few other policies here, and a lot of them you probably won't configure. But it's still a good idea to at least come in here, take 5 minutes, have a look at them, because most of you are probably going to find something in here that perks your interest. Now, by the way, since I didn't mention it earlier, down here in our system notification area, you can see at a glance the status of our battery life. And if you're connected to power, you're going to see, like I have, that this battery icon will have this little power plug cord over it. So this icon is going to gradually show less and less battery life as time goes by, or more and more as we start charging it. So if we hover our mouse, you can see that now that little shortcut style pop-up has just appeared. We'll see how long that Windows 7 thinks our battery is going to last. There you go, 61%, based on its current settings and of course what you're doing on the notebook. So if you start watching a DVD movie whilst you're running on battery, you're going to expect those numbers to drop pretty quick. Now if you click this battery icon up here, you're going to get this little pop-up window where you can get quick access to the power plans on your system. So we could change these on the fly if we like. We can adjust our screen brightness, and we can also go through some of the more advanced power options here. Now the final thing I want to point out is the power management settings that are available back in Group Policy. So let's go back to our Group Policy editor, and underneath the computer configuration heading, we'll expand, which we already have, Administrative Templates. Now we'll expand System, and if we expand Power Management here, you'll see here that we've got 5 different folders relating to practically all aspects of our system that involve power management. So if we select first one, Button Settings, we can control via policy what we want our systems to do when the power button is pressed or the sleep button is pressed, or what Windows 7 will do when we close the lid on the notebook. If we select the next one, Hard Disk Settings, we can choose to shut down our hard disk when we're on battery or on standard power. Under Notification Settings, we can choose to notify us when our battery reaches a certain level of charge left, and we can perform some specific actions when our battery is low. With our Sleep Settings, we can configure various policies here detailing what our computer should do when sleeping, and there's even specific policies in here, like the one at the very top here, that can allow us to use applications to prevent our computer from sleeping and have those applications keep our computer alive. Now finally, we've got Video and Display Settings, which deal with shutting off our screen to save power. Now most of these policies really are features that can be controlled through the Windows Mobility and Power Saving Control Panel applets, but of course when you enable them through policies like these, you can force these changes to be system-wide, not just for a specific user account. Okay, well in this video we've talked about the mobility and offline file options we have with Windows 7. Since notebook computers and tablet PCs, they're so popular nowadays, it's great to see that Microsoft have made Windows 7 very mobile PC friendly right out of the box. Unfortunately, over the last few years, we've seen great leaps in functionality and power of mobile computers, but practically no advances in battery life. And if you rely on a notebook computer or even a netbook computer to keep you going, you'll most likely appreciate the power management features of Windows 7. So take a look at the power plans within Windows 7 or go create your own, and you'll probably find your notebook going that extra mile for you. So we hope you've enjoyed this video and would like to thank you for watching.